thank you very much for inviting me here today. Again, my name's Jeremy Bertrand. I'm a tax specialist with the Ontario Ministry of Finance, and it's my pleasure to go out and speak to audiences all across Ontario and try to teach them about what types of tax credits and benefits are available for you. And we like to talk to all sorts of different target groups. We speak to older groups of adults here in Ontario. We're also now going out to grade 12s and starting to teach them in the classroom about why it's important to start filing a tax return. We've spoken to many disability support groups as well, newcomers to Canada, trying to explain to them how the tax system works, and then of course the credits and the benefits. So it's a pretty good job that I have, because I'm actually working for the Ministry of Finance, but I'm out telling people how to get money from the Ontario government. So that's a pretty good job, isn't it? Now you might be wondering, is the government really going to give me some tips on how to save money? And absolutely. The key thing, our key message when we go out and we talk to audiences across Ontario is the importance of, one, filing your tax return every single year, because many of the credits and the benefits I'm going to talk about today are tied into the income tax return. So it's very important. But then, even on top of that, it's you individually understanding what types of credits and benefits are available, because you need to know about the credits in order to apply for them. Just out of curiosity, how many of you do your own income tax returns every year? So just maybe a show of hands. How many do your own income tax returns? Your husband. Okay, so again, not even half the audience. And that is very typical of audiences that I speak to across Ontario. Very few, it seems, these days are doing their own income tax returns. And so you are relying on a tax preparer to get you the most money back. But one thing I caution people is your income tax return preparer is only as good as the information that you provide them. So the more you know, the better it is. And so even if you don't file your own income tax return, what I recommend all audiences or all people to do is, at the very minimum, still obtain a tax return every spring, whether you go to the post office and grab a paper copy of the return, or you go online to the Canada Revenue Agency's website and look at the tax return every year, and at the very minimum, read the What's New section right at the start of the return, because that's how you stay on top of things. That's how you keep a good understanding of what's changed from last year to this year to next year. Because there are things that pop up every single year, credits and benefits that might apply to you, and you may not even know it. So that's one tip. Always get your own return and read the What's New section. And again, the more information you can give to whoever does your tax return, the better it is. So just for the rest of you that didn't put your hand up there, how many of you maybe go to a friend or a family member to get your tax return done? Yeah, some of you. I find many people just don't trust their friends and family members, so they don't go to them to file their tax return. How about, do any of you go to the free tax clinics? It's called the Community Volunteer Income Tax Preparation Clinic. Did you even know about those? So there are free clinics held throughout the province. Now, you have to have a straightforward return. It can't be too complicated. And there is an income threshold, depending on your circumstances. But if you want to learn about where they are and whether or not you can get your return done for free by a volunteer, you would call the Canada Revenue Agency or go onto their website. There's a list of all the places and their addresses and when they're being held. So there's another option for you. I suspect a few of you are perhaps paying a professional of some sort to do your income tax returns. How many go that route? Yes, so over half of the room. And again, that's where it's important for you to be making sure you're keeping all the right information, so that when you turn that information over to that person, they can get you the most money back from the government. Anybody here not filing their tax returns? I can get your fingerprint and maybe do a blood sample at the end of the seminar today. No, but it is so important to file your return. I do meet people who maybe are behind a year or two and they're losing out on money potentially. So important to file the return. So if we were to look at the next slide here. So let's start then with our section that's designed for adults of all ages, not just older adults. So we'll take a look at something called the Ontario Trillium Benefit as our first category. So this is a refundable tax credit or benefit, which is good. Refundable means that even if you don't owe any income tax, you can get a credit from the government and get some money coming back to you. What is the Ontario Trillium Benefit? Well, it's a fairly new name for three credits that have actually been around for at least a little while. The Ontario Energy and Property Tax Credit. So if you pay rent or if you pay property tax, or if you pay an amount for energy costs every year, you want to make sure that you apply for that credit. The Ontario sales tax credit. Well, we all pay sales tax throughout the year when we make purchases, and so there is a credit available. Now, Northern Ontario Energy Credit. Do any of you get that credit? Of course, we're in Southern Ontario, so you don't. But just this past week, I was in Northern Ontario, so I was at Elliott Lake and Timmins, audiences like that, and they all qualify for that credit. If you live north of, let's say, Parry Sound or Huntsville, there is an extra credit that's available to our Ontarians in that area because energy costs are typically higher the further north we go. So down here, though, we don't apply for that because we would not get it. So we'll just check out the next slide. So how do you get the Ontario Trillium benefit? How do you apply for it? Well, as I was saying earlier, it's all tied into you filing a tax return. So I've got a good old-fashioned paper copy of the return. More and more people today are filing electronically. But whether you use the paper copy or the electronic version, you used to, right on page 1 of the tax return, have to check a box off at the bottom. And that was you applying for the GST credit, but also the Ontario sales tax credit. So this past year, it got simpler. You don't need to check that box anymore. It's not even there. All you need to do is file your income tax return, and that is your application. Now, when it comes to the Ontario sales tax credit and the federal GST, HST credit. But in order to apply for the energy and property tax credit, and if you live up north, the Northern Ontario Energy Credit, you need to open up the Ontario forms and to fill out the appropriate form, which is the application for the, well, this past year, the 2015 Ontario Trillium benefit and the Senior Homeowner Property Tax Grant. So that's the name of the form. And it's as simple as checking off the box that says, yes, I'd like to apply for it. And on the back of the page, you need to let us know what your rent or your property tax amounts were. That's simple, but if you don't open up that form and check the box off, you haven't applied. So it's very important to file your return and to make sure that you're checking off the proper boxes. You'll note at the bottom of the slide, it says even if you don't have any income to report. So you might have no taxable income, but should I file a return? Absolutely, because that's the only way you can actually apply for these payments. So very important that you do that. And it's a simple process, but you need to know how to do it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the Ontario Trillium benefit. So we're going to look at the circumstances that determine the amount that you individually get when it comes to the Ontario Trillium benefit. So what it boils down to are 5 general sets of circumstances. So first of all, your age. So again, we're out there teaching grade 12 students now the importance of starting to file, because at the age of 18 or 19, that's when credits and benefits sort of kick in. Parents stop getting the credits for their children. They're now considered adults, so they need to file. They need to start filing. But then when we get older on, at the age of 65, for example, certain credits pop up and some credits get better. So for example, the Ontario Energy and Property Tax Credit, it gets better once you turn 65. You actually get more money than someone who's under the age of 65. And so what I like to tell our married couples is, if one of you will be turning 65 in a different year than the other, the tax return actually instructs the older person to file the return or to claim the benefit on their return, that credit, because you'll get more money. So just a little tip when it comes to those of you who are about to turn 65. Now, the size of your family matters when it comes to the sales tax credit. The larger the family, the larger the credit. It's based on the number of individuals living at home in the family, parents and children. So again, for my older adult audiences, you're typically going to get a sales tax credit based on 1 or 2 people. And that's how much you'll get. So the sales tax credit is related to the size of your family. Your income matters for these 3 credits. The more money you make, the less help you get, and vice versa. The less money you make, the more help you get. Now, how much money or income you can make before the government says, you know what, that's too much and we won't give you the whole credit or any of the credit, it varies from credit to credit. So if you look at one and you determine, oh no, I don't get that one, that doesn't mean you won't get one of the other 2 credits. So what I like to tell people is, when you're filling out your tax return, if you're not sure, even if you are sure, apply for it anyway. The government is not going to send you the money if you don't qualify for it. But if you don't apply for it, you'll never know. So simply apply for it. If you'd like more information, of course, I have brought the details with me today. You can get more information about these credits. And at the end of the seminar, I'll be showing people where online you can get this information as well. So your location matters because, as I said earlier, if you live up in Northern Ontario, you get that third credit, whereas our Southern audiences don't. And then how much do you pay for rent? How much do you pay for property tax? The more you pay, well, the more you can get back as a credit, or the more income you're allowed to earn and still get a credit of some sort. So again, we take these 5 variables we take that into account, and that's how the Ontario government determines, well, how much each of your Ontario Trillium benefits turns out to be. So we'll look at the next slide. You might have noticed when you were filing your income tax return this past year, for example, that there is more than one option now when it comes to receiving the Ontario Trillium benefit. Now, if you get $360 or less, there's actually no option. You get it all in a lump sum each July, right at the very beginning of the benefit year, which runs from July of one year all the way to June of the next year. Now, if you get more than $360, you have an option. So if you don't check anything off in the tax return, you will get monthly payments. But there is a box that you can check off on the same form I was just telling you about, and that's your choosing a lump sum option. But bear in mind, be careful. If you choose option B, which is that lump sum option, and you are going to get more than $360, you are stating that you're going to wait until the end of the benefit year to get that lump sum payment. So instead of getting the payment starting in July, you're deferring the payment until the following June. So do you really want to do that? It's totally up to you. But when you do your tax return, or whoever does your tax return for you, you need to instruct them as to which method you would like and make sure you choose appropriately. And I think we have one more tip when it comes to the Ontario Trillium benefit, and that's if it comes down to if you have a balance owing to the Canada Revenue Agency, then this is one benefit that they will redirect and apply to your balance owing. So if you are waiting for your Ontario Trillium benefit and you happen to owe the Canada Revenue Agency a balance, that will be redirected until you no longer have a balance owing with them. So that again is the information on the Ontario Trillium benefit. And again, I have handouts with me here that give you more information, and the information is also available right on the Ontario government's website, which I'll show at the end of the seminar. So again, I had said earlier that that's an example of a refundable tax credit, which means even if you don't owe any income tax, if you've got a credit sitting there, you'll get that money, which is great. Now, if we have taxable income, so maybe we had income from the past year, we did have some income tax deducted throughout the year. Well, when it comes time to filling out your income tax return, what are we all trying to do? We're trying to generate enough credits to create a refund situation, aren't we? And so the way we do that is when we go down both the federal and the Ontario forms in the income tax return, we're trying to claim as many non-refundable tax credits as possible to try to lower how much income tax we actually owed, and that will generate a refund. So a non-refundable tax credit, they're good if we owe income tax. If we had to pay it throughout the year, we can potentially bring down the income tax as low as 0. Now, if we have any excess credits, they don't benefit us anymore at that point, unless we can perhaps transfer some of the credits to a spouse or another family member. So that's sort of the difference between a refundable and a non-refundable tax credit. There are a few that I do like to remind people about that maybe you're not familiar with. Again, if we're not doing our own tax returns, we can sort of lose touch with what credits are even there listed in the tax return. We don't even know what's available. For example, that caregiver amount. If you share your residence with a family member and you maintain the dwelling, okay, and they are dependent on you, and there are one of two ways that can generally happen. One is they might have a disability, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on when we get to that section. But what if it's mom and dad, or if it's grandma and grandpa, and we share our house with them, and we maintain the dwelling, we take care of it, and we take care of them? Well, did you know that you can potentially claim a caregiver credit on your tax return? And I actually have a good example for you, and that's myself. 8 years ago, I built a little section of the house for mom and dad, and I take care of them, and I take care of the house. I maintain the dwelling for them. So there's a caregiver potentially. Now that is income tested, so it will depend on mom or dad or grandma or grandpa's income. But if they're over the age of 65, and you're sharing that dwelling with them, you want to at least explore this credit to see whether or not that can save some money on your income tax return. Same with tuition and education. So are you paying perhaps for your children or your grandchildren's post-secondary education? Once they start going to university or college, they start building up tuition and education amount credits. But they may not necessarily be able to use them that year because a lot of younger adults, they're not working enough yet to really owe much when it comes to income tax. So what they have to do with those credits is bank them. They'll carry them forward to the following year. Maybe they can use them that year. But you do have the option of transferring some of those credits over to yourself. So again, if you owe some income tax and you are paying for children or grandchildren's post-secondary education, why not examine whether or not you can transfer some of those tuition and education amounts to your credit or your return, and that might generate a refund for you. So just a little tip. Donations and gifts. Again, when we make donations and gifts to, let's say, a registered charity, and we get a receipt, right? First of all, make sure you have a folder at home for all your current year tax return receipts and bills, because what you need to take that receipt right away and stick it in the folder. Otherwise, what will happen when it comes to income tax preparation time? You're not going to find that receipt, right? It's long gone. You've lost it. So always make sure you do that. But what are some examples of places or registered charities that you might donate to and get a receipt? Can you think of any that are common? Any registered charity, but a lot of people will say, you know, the Cancer Society or Heart and Stroke, or if you're going to church, right? So you get a receipt back for those receipts. By all means, you get to claim that. So there are actually quite a few. And so the amount of the credit for up to $200 worth of receipts each year is about half the credit, more or less, of any amounts that you have over $200. So if you want to save a few dollars off your tax return every year, the amount of tax that you owe, did you know that you can save those receipts for up to 5 years and then process them all at once on one income tax return? That's an option. In fact, the federal government just a couple of years introduced a first-time donors bonus. It's a bonus of 25% on up to $1,000 if you're a first-time claiming gifts and donations, or if you haven't claimed anything for several years, that also allows you to do that. So not only will you get the regular credit, but you'll get a bonus. So, and that just popped up, I think, 2 years ago on the tax return. So again, if you're not reading what's new, you don't even know that this exists. So when it comes to donations and gifts, you can make that work for you as well, and maybe save you a few dollars when it comes to how much income tax you owe. Now, let's talk about medical expenses for a moment. So again, in order for us to claim our medical expenses, we have to have owed some income tax, right? We needed to have enough income where there was some tax payable. And so we try to use medical expenses to lower how much tax, either for ourselves or for perhaps we're married, our spouse, for example. Now, for most people in Ontario, it sort of works out that you need to have medical expenses that exceed 3% of your net income. And so that means you have to have perhaps a fair amount. You can test it under both spouses' income if you're married, so it might help out one more than the other. It doesn't treat the income as combined, so you need to test that out as well. But what I find when I go around the province and I ask people, I sort of poll the group as to what types of expenses you typically save the bills and the receipts for and try to claim it as a medical expense. I find most people are guessing. Now, they might know the major ones. What are some of the major ones that you can think of? Medication, right? So prescription drugs, right? That's one category for sure. Anything else that you can think of?
Massage therapy.
Massage therapy? Anything? Physical therapist?
Dental.
Dental, that's a big one, right? And same with vision, right? Vision-related expenses. Those are big ones that everybody gets. When I go out to the more remote locations in Ontario, a fair number seem to know about traveling expenses, but a fair number don't. And there's a rule there too, where if you have to travel more than 40 kilometers each way, for example, you can perhaps start tracking out your kilometers and you get a credit based on your mileage. And if you're traveling more than 80 kilometers each way, then you can claim even more expenses that relate to travel. So that's something that not everybody realizes. Again, I tell people, don't guess. There's a little publication that nobody really seems to know about. It's available right on the Canada Revenue Agency's website, and it's called Medical and Disability Related Expenses. This lists alphabetically everything that we can claim as a medical expense. How many of you know about this booklet? Not one hand is up. And this is very typical of an audience in Ontario. Very few people seem to know. You see, when you go to the post office, for example, and you get a package, tax package every year, this isn't in it. You need to know about it. And so the thing I like about this book, again, it lists alphabetically everything that we can claim. So instead of guessing, why not get one of these books and go down the list and circle everything that applies to you and your family? And now you're keeping the right bills. And then whoever does your tax return, when they ask you, did you have any medical expenses for last year? Well, you're handing them a complete set of documents and not just what you guessed at last year. There was a question?
Where can you get it?
That's a good question. So where can you get this booklet? Well, I've brought a supply with me, so I can be your supplier for this year, but you may not see me next year. And so the way you get this, you would call the Canada Revenue Agency and order one, or you can go right on their website and either read the document electronically. It doesn't really change a lot from year to year. I think last year compared to the year before, there were 2 editions. And the What's New section of your return does outline what has changed, so you will see that. So you don't necessarily need one of these every year, but if you want one every year, go onto the Canada Revenue Agency's website and either read it or order it online. You can do that online. That's how I get my copies. Or again, like today, come and see me afterwards and I'll give you your own copy. So that way you're not guessing and you're getting a proper set of documents put together. Again, one more tip when it comes to medical expenses. You don't necessarily have to claim a calendar year's worth of expenses. But why wouldn't you? It's much easier to claim a calendar year's worth of expenses. Well, perhaps 2 years ago when you did your tax return, you didn't have enough expenses to claim them. But maybe you did have a big expense, maybe in the fall of that year. Well, you know what? Why not the following year? Go back to that month. You didn't claim it on a previous tax return. Start your 12-month period from that month and go forward. You're still filing for a 12-month period that ends in the taxation year that you're filing, but you now might be able to claim that big expense because that sort of starts your period off. So it's just a tip that might save you some money, and you never know. So now let's focus on some credits and benefits that are designed for our older adults only. Okay, so let's take a look at this senior section. He looks kind of grumpy, but he's actually pretty happy because there are lots of credits and benefits available for him. So we'll go on to the next slide, and we're going to talk for a few minutes about the Healthy Home Renovation Tax Credit. So this is a provincial tax credit. So it's not a combination of federal and provincial. It's just a provincial, but it is through the tax return. So what is the Healthy Homes Renovation Tax Credit? Well, it's a tax credit that's designed to help our older Ontarians stay in their houses for as long as possible. So let's face it, if we're getting older and we want to stay in our house for as long as possible, we may need to make some modifications to the house to keep it accessible, to keep us mobile and functional within our houses. And so if you do some home renovations that sort of meet that purpose, there is money available from the Ontario government. As a matter of fact, it's a permanent refundable tax credit, so that's great, right? Permanent and refundable. Those are the types of credits that we want to get. Can you think of what types of permanent home modifications an older adult would undertake in their house to make it more accessible, safer from a mobility perspective, those types of things? What types of changes would someone make? Yeah, so there was a couple things I heard right away. Stairs. So right, if you have a stairway in your house, when you get older, it might be pretty hard to get up and down the stairs. So you might install a chairlift. They can be pretty expensive. I've seen anywhere from $3,000 to $12,000 just in my own searches. If you have a circular staircase, very expensive. So, that's an undertaking from a financial perspective, isn't it? The bathroom. I heard someone say the bathroom, and there are many things that you might change in a bathroom. The bathtub, for example. My mom and dad's bathroom, they have a jacuzzi tub. That's what Dad insisted on. And so that's been fine, but you know what? This past winter, and my parents are now in their mid-70s, so this past winter, guess who had a foot operation and couldn't get in and out of the bathtub for several weeks? Well, no, it wasn't Dad, it was Mom. So, Mom and I, we didn't talk to Dad for a few weeks, but we're over that now. But the bottom line is, we are going to have to look at changing that bathtub soon. So there are several options when it comes to replacing that bathtub. What can you think of as an option? Yeah, the walk-in bathtub. So those are those ones with the doors, right? And so that makes getting in and out of a bath or having a bath a lot easier, right? There's another option as well, perhaps. Yeah, handrails for sure. A walk-in or a roll-in shower. You know, shower sort of designed for maybe someone with a walker or a wheelchair to get in and out of. So that certainly would count as well. Still in the bathroom, there are many other things that might count. A raised toilet. And I don't mean the type with a little portable thing on the top of it. I mean those comfort height toilets, that would count. Perhaps the installation of non-slip flooring. Maybe you need to make modifications to the cabinetry because someone now has a wheelchair and you can't actually get to the sink. Even with the sink and the doors, you might need wider doors, but think of the handles, right? Doors and sinks typically maybe have those twisty style door handles or faucets. So if you replace them with maybe those nice easy to use lever style, that would count as well. Even something as simple as installing pull-out drawers in the bathroom or even the kitchen. Those are some things that would count. Anything else that you can think of? A home modification that results in a ramp? Yeah, so that's probably more on the outside, right? So a wheelchair ramp, or I've seen in a neighborhood close to me, an older couple have a lift on the outside of their house. That's what gets them in and out of that front door. So,
Lighting?
Lighting, yes. So improved lighting. Perhaps you've got an area that's low lighting. It's a tripping hazard, right? And you need to improve that. So you would want to claim that. The fact is we don't actually have a full list because there are many things that possibly would count depending on your circumstances. And you just need to know about the credit and you need to know how to apply for this. So you got all of these examples, I think, so well done, but these are just a few of the examples. Now on the next slide, there are some things that you should not try to claim this tax credit on. So certain expenses. If you need to do some general house maintenance, all houses need maintenance on an annual basis, right? And maybe even more on a more occasional basis, but they have nothing to do with improving your accessibility and your mobility around the house, like new shingles or new insulation, new windows, those types of things. You wouldn't want to claim on this because that will be rejected. If you need a device, and certain devices I can think of, a cane, a walker, a wheelchair, maybe a hearing aid, those are devices. So that's not a home modification. So you can't claim this credit because they don't count. There is another program here in Ontario you would want to explore, and that's called the Assistive Devices Program. I believe that's administered by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. And so that's where you would go to get some assistance when it comes to devices. You might be paying for services as well. Maybe someone comes and cuts your grass or shovels your driveway. Maybe you're paying for someone to come in and clean the house. Or what else? Maybe Meals on Wheels. Maybe you pay for a security system. That might keep you safe from a burglary perspective, but not from a mobility perspective. So those types of services, they're not home modifications, so you can't claim those expenses for this tax credit as well. But like I said, there are many, many things that you can claim, and so you need to make sure that you attempt to get that money back from the government. So who can apply for the credit? Well, anybody who's going to be 65 or older by the end of the year in which the work was done. So that's sort of the starting point. This is a credit that's restricted to older adults. It doesn't matter if you're a homeowner or if you're paying rent, as long as you have those bills for the work done in your house, you'll want to claim it. If you're a condominium owner, there are plenty of things you might change in a condominium and you pay property tax, right? So you can claim that as well. I kind of like that bottom box, people who share their house with a senior relative. Guess who shares a house with a senior relative? Both of my parents are over 65. So when it comes time to replace that jacuzzi tub with something that's a little easier to get in and out of, you know, something safer, I can claim the credit because I share my house with mom and dad. And that goes with all households out there. Anyone in Ontario that shares their house with a senior relative, either the senior or the non-senior can claim the credit. So let's learn a little bit more then about this credit. On the next slide, let's talk about how much you can get when it comes to this credit. So the most that you can claim in any given year is up to $10,000 worth of expenses. If you're married, it's $10,000 for the two of you, unless for some reason you're living in separate residences perhaps because of a breakdown in the marriage or maybe for medical reasons. At that point, now both individuals could claim up to $10,000. But for single people or a married couple living together, it's up to $10,000. You get 15% back. on that max of $10,000. So the most you could get back is $1,500 a year. If you spent $10,000 last year, you can get $1,500. If you spent $15,000, you'd only get the $1,500. You can't bank any money either. If you only spent $8,000, that doesn't give you $12,000 to claim next year, and vice versa. Or conversely, if you spent $15,000, you can't claim the $10,000 this year and use that extra $5,000 next year, because the expenses you're claiming have to have occurred in the year, the taxation year that you're filing for. So I hope that makes sense. Now look at that bottom box. That's a really nice thing about this tax credit. Your income doesn't matter. So if you have a credit there, you're going to get some money back. You have to simply make sure you claim the credit to generate that money coming back to you. So how do you claim the credit? Well, let's take a look at that on the very next slide. So it's sort of my key message as I go on and on throughout the seminar. It's so important to file that tax return, because right in the tax return, and again, I've got my paper copy here, but in the Ontario forms, there's a schedule. It's S12, I believe, and that's where you list all of your expenses that relate to the Healthy Home Renovation Tax Credit. Totaled up, 15% to a maximum of $1,500 will come back to you as part of your income tax refund, or it would lower your income tax if you have a balance owing. But so it's a really great credit. Now, if you've never heard of this credit, and I meet many people every week that this is their first time they've heard about it, this credit is retroactive to October 2011. So if you have receipts for work that was done and you qualify for this tax credit, you can go back and get it. I'll show you how to do that right near the end of the seminar. Keep your receipts. Don't send your receipts into the Canada Revenue Agency with your tax return. Just think, if everybody did that, they'd probably have to build a new building just to store all those receipts in. And we don't want that to happen. If they want to see your receipts, they will contact you. They call that a review of your account. So other than that, though, you keep your receipts, keep it in your current year tax folder, or the folder that you have at home for that taxation year, and have them handy. We must have our supporting documentation at home somewhere, and that's what you need to do. So let me test your knowledge just for one moment. Let's imagine that you're Steve and Kathy, and you put in a walk-in bathtub and non-slip flooring, so $4,000 worth of expenses. Several years ago, when you did your tax return, there was no tax credit available, but now there is. So do you see how much they will get back as a tax credit on that $4,000? It's 15% or $600. Now, it doesn't matter if it's Steve or it's Kathy claiming the credit. One of them can claim all of it. They can split it up. It doesn't matter. It's the same amount coming back, no matter how you split it. The only time it might matter is if they both tried to claim the entire amount of $4,000. Do you know who would get that credit at that point?
Nobody.
So, lots of people say, no one will get it. No, one of them will get it. It's simple as whoever files their tax return first. And just a little joke, a colleague of mine, he does this presentation, he was telling the audience about his mom and dad. Dad always files his tax return before mom. Do you know why? He's claiming all the tax credits and the benefits and not telling her, and then he's spending his tax refund, and she doesn't realize how much he's, so who knows, they may not be together for too much longer, but I'm not really sure if mom knows what dad's doing. So if any of your spouses are filing the return before you and you're wondering why, maybe it's because they're trying to claim all the tax credits and the benefits, and you don't really realize it. But for you, in walking away from here, how will you sort of understand how this credit, or how will you remember how this credit works? Well, you want to get a copy of this brochure, this little pamphlet here. And so I've brought a supply with me today. This is available on the Ontario Ministry of Finance's website, and this can give you a very good overview of how the tax credit works. So make sure you grab one of these before you head home today. Okay, let's move on to a couple of other topics that are designed for our older adults only. So the Senior Homeowner Property Tax Grant. Have you heard of that type of payment? So it's a payment of up to $500 per year per household for our older adults. So you have to be 65 or older in order to claim this, and you have to own your own home or a condominium, right? Because you're paying property tax. And so someone who's older that meets that age requirement, they can potentially claim the Ontario Energy and Property Tax Credit that we talked about earlier, and also the Senior Homeowner Property Tax Grant. In fact, the way you apply for this, it's all on that same form I discussed earlier. So that application for the 2015 Ontario Trillium Benefit, and senior homeowner property tax grant. So again, it's one of the boxes that you check off, or if you're doing your return electronically, again, you still have to say yes or check the box off electronically, and then tell the government how much you paid for property tax. And that's your application. It's very simple. There is an income test for this particular one. So if you're married, if your combined net income is under $45,000, you will get the entire $500 payment. If the combined income is between $45,000 and $60,000, you will get a prorated amount. And if your combined income is over $60,000, then there won't be a payment for this grant. If you're single, those figures go down to $35,000 being the lower and $50,000 at the upper. So again, I have a handout for this as well. A fairly simple application. One little tip, the first year you would claim this is the year you turn 65. And what I mean by that is, let's say you turned 65 or you're turning 65 this year. When you did your 2014 tax return, even though you were doing last year's tax return, you are applying for this year's payment. So you needed to check the box off and apply for it, and that would have generated you a 2015 payment, again, of up to $500. The payment is not part of your income tax refund. It's a separate payment. So most people that file their return on time, they receive the payment sometime in May or perhaps early June, depending on when they filed their return. So again, if you'd like to learn more about that, make sure you get the information from me before you leave today. So one final payment that I wanted to sort of focus in on is something that we call GAINS, Guaranteed Annual Income System. And what this is a payment of up to $83 a month for seniors who are 65 or older. And you have to be a low-income senior to get this payment. What do I mean by low income? Well, I mean that you qualify for 2 federal payments, the Old Age Security and the Guaranteed Income Supplement. Have you heard of both of those payments? If you want to learn more about those, you need to contact the federal government, because those are federal payments. So it's Service Canada that you would get in touch with to apply for those payments. Now, if you get both of those payments and your income from all other sources, your taxable income from other sources is approximately $2,000 or less each year, then you will automatically start receiving GAINS payments. But if it's over that, then you won't qualify. You don't need to apply for GAINS. All you need to do is apply for those federal payments and file your tax return every year. And our government will automatically review your income to see if you qualify for the payments, and then we'll send you the GAINS payments. So again, I have a handout on that as well, and you can learn about that before you leave today. Now, we'll look at a couple of non-refundable tax credits that only older adults get to claim. So sort of a bonus for being older. Once you turn 65, when you do your tax return and you're going down those list of credits, there's an age amount that you can start claiming now. So once you're 65, you're able to make a few thousand more dollars each year and not have to pay any income tax on it. So that's great. The pension income amount. So perhaps you worked at a company and now you're retired, and now you're claiming, or now you're receiving some pension from that company. That's pension income. Or perhaps you put money into RSPs throughout your life and now you've converted it to a RIF and you're pulling the money out. That's pension income. So you are able to claim a credit on that money, and it's called the pension income amount. Again, if you're married, you might want to consider splitting some of your income with your spouse if the one spouse perhaps didn't have any type of pension income, because now both of you can claim that pension income amount. Not to mention the person who's in the higher tax bracket might get them down to a lower tax bracket, and that will save you some money on the tax return as well. And again, if you're married and you can't use all these credits, perhaps you've already got yourself down to 0 owing on the tax return, well, you can look at transferring some of these credits then over to your spouse. People with a disability, so let's take a look at that, especially as it relates to older adults, because you may have been sailing through life and never claimed any type of credit that relates to disability. And you know what can tend to happen? We forget that there are credits available on the tax return that relate to someone having a disability. And so years can go by. I've met many adults where years have gone by and they haven't been claiming credits that are available. So, for example, the caregiver amount. We talked about it earlier, just the fact that you share your residence with maybe mom or dad, grandma and grandpa who are 65 or older. That is a situation where you want to examine whether or not you qualify for the caregiver. But the same with if you have a relative who's perhaps has a disability and they're dependent on you for that reason, and you share your house with them. That's another reason to examine whether or not the caregiver amount works for you. This past year, I believe it can save you up to about $1,000 off of your income tax. So that's a way to help out the person who's providing the care. What if the person doesn't live with you? What if they don't share the house with you, but they're related to you and they're dependent on you? You know, my wife's grandma, for example, she's 87, she lives in a retirement home. But, you know, our family still takes her to all the doctor's appointments, and we still take her out shopping every week, and we cook certain meals for her, so she still might be dependent on us. Now, grandma's actually in pretty good shape. I don't consider her infirm yet, although I am watching her. But that's besides the point. But if the time comes where she could be considered infirm, and again, depending on her income, my family might be able to claim a credit. You have to know about the credit, though, before you can look at claiming it. The disability amount is another credit that many people, I suspect, might be missing out on. So what this is all about, and we'll go on to the next slide. If you have a severe and prolonged disability, and it's going to last longer than a year. That's what prolonged means. And severe, well, it has to markedly restrict you in one of the major categories of life. And I believe they use the term 90% of the time. The bottom line is there's this credit called the disability tax credit that's available, and it can save people up to about $1,500 a year off their tax. Again, it's a non-refundable tax credit, so in order for it to benefit the person with the disability, they have to have some taxable income that they owed some income tax on, right? Otherwise, though, they can perhaps transfer this credit to another family member. So you really need to check this out. Now, you can't self-certify that you're disabled. Imagine how many people all of a sudden might have a disability. But there is a form that you take to your medical practitioner, for example, and you need to have a discussion with that qualified professional. And this is the form you take, the Disability Tax Credit Certificate. You may have heard of the T2201. That's the form number. So if you ever go to look for this online, it's on the Canada Revenue Agency's website, and that's the form that you search. So this is the form that you take to the doctor. And there are several categories that can qualify someone. Are you blind, for example? Do you receive life-sustaining therapy? Perhaps like the kidney dialysis, where you might go into the hospital several times a week. That's something. But do you have a condition or a combination of conditions that limit you in speaking, in hearing, in walking, your bowel and bladder functions, your ability to feed or get dressed, even the category mental functions necessary for everyday life? That can cover a wide range of disabilities or conditions. So again, you need to talk to the doctor about this. For example, just for walking, with older adults, we're all at some point probably going to slow down, right? And if our walking is to the point where it takes us 3 times as long as normal, for example, or if you have to stop frequently to catch your breath, if you have a cane or a walker, maybe a sticker that says you can park close to the store, those are indicators that might prompt you or should prompt you to perhaps have a discussion with your doctor to see whether or not you're close to qualifying for the disability tax credit. The doctor might charge you to fill out this form. When I got Grandpa a couple of years ago to see his doctor, the doctor charged $40. Guess what you can claim that as? A medical expense, right? So you save that bill. But once the doctor has filled this out and they agree, and again, your doctor have to be thorough, they have to use the right language, right? They have to, give this some time when they're filling it out. Once it's completed, then it gets sent to the Canada Revenue Agency. They get the final say. So they'll review this and they'll write back to you saying yes or no. If they say yes, bingo, now you can start claiming the disability tax credit, either the person with the disability or perhaps transferring it to someone else. And again, depending on when the doctor backdated the condition to, you might be able to go back several years and get this credit. And I've seen this work for many people, and it could be thousands of dollars. So you need to know about it. So again, that booklet I showed you earlier on medical, it's medical and disability. So it talks to you about both. And that's another reason why this is an outstanding booklet to become familiar with. It talks about attendant care expenses and other, all of the credits that are sort of related to this topic, and helps you understand what's available. So again, I've got both of these with me today, and if you need to get them though on your own. Either order these off of the Canada Revenue Agency's website or perhaps call them and they can send you a copy. Very quickly, if you have someone who's under the age of 50 or maybe they recently turned 50 and they qualify for the federal disability tax credit, the thing I just talked about, there is something called RDSPs. It's like an RRSP, but for people with disabilities, Registered Disability Savings Plans. If you've never heard of this, it's definitely something you want to take a look at, because we'll go on to the next slide. The way it works is if someone qualifies for the disability tax credit, well, they can go to their financial institution and open up either a Canada Disability Savings Bond or a Canada Disability Savings Grant, or perhaps both, and it can really help out this person with the disability down the road for when they are of an age of retirement. That's sort of what it's geared for. And so it works pretty neat. The bond, I've got 2 legally blind sisters. They're on Ontario Disability Support. Okay, so they don't have taxable income. They can't afford to put money away in savings, but if they go and open up a bond, the federal government could put up to $1,000 a year in for up to 20 years or until they turn 50. So think of that. Think of the money that's now helping out that person with the disability. The way the grant works, if you can put $500 a year into the grant, the feds might put up to $1,500 a year in. And if you could put up to an extra $1,000 in, the federal government might put an extra $2,000 in. And you can do that up until $70,000 or until they turn 50. So there's a way to generate some funds for people with disabilities. So if you've never heard of this, again, I've got the booklet, the brochure that deals with that, and the Canada Revenue Agency's website also has more information with regard to this program as well. So we're going to wrap up. I think my time is pretty much over, isn't it? Yes. I'm surprised there's not a hook sort of pulling me off the stage here. But, so where can you, oh, before I do that, just a very quick note. Do you know the difference between a tax-free savings account and an RRSP? So when you put money into an RRSP, the point is you're trying to get a tax break that year, but don't forget down the road when you need to pull the money out, it does get added to your income that year. So you want to financially plan wisely when it comes to that, because that money now gets added to your other income that year, and it could impact the amount of credits and benefits you receive. The tax-free savings accounts, when you put the money into one of those, there is no tax break that year. But down the road, when you take the money out and the interest, it doesn't impact your taxable income that way. 2 different ways to save, and whichever way works best for you, you sort of need to figure that out and make a good plan. So how do you get information as you go away from here today? Well, again, I've brought a lot of information with me, but you can go onto the Ontario Ministry of Finance's website. You can go onto the Canada Revenue Agency's website. You can phone both of the organizations. That's where you're going to get a lot of help. Service Canada is another provider of information. For example, the Old Age Security and the Guaranteed Income Supplement, that's Service Canada. So their phone number, their website, you can get in touch with them. There are other programs as well. We're not going to go beyond this slide, but for our older adults, there's a publication called A Guide to Programs in Services for Seniors in Ontario. If you've never seen this publication, you can order this through the Ontario or Publications Ontario website or the Ontario Senior Secretariat's website. You can order these. But again, I've brought a supply with me today. This is an excellent publication to learn about what's available and how to contact their respective organization. So those are some of your key ways on how to get information. You may walk away from this seminar, if you're looking at this online, you may now realize, holy smokes, I don't think I've been claiming everything I can or could have. Is it too late? Can I go back and get the money? Well, yes. Most of the things I've talked about today are administered by the Canada Revenue Agency. And so you can go back and adjust 3 years worth of returns, no problem. You can actually go back up to 10 years. I believe that's at their discretion, but I've seen it work for many, many people. And you need to file either a T1 adjustment form. It's a simple single-page, 2-sided form, and you list what year you're changing, which line in the return you're changing, what you're changing it to, and why you're changing it. It's that simple. And again, I've got a supply of those, but you can get those on the Canada Revenue Agency's website as well. Or you can simply write them a letter saying, I need to make these changes, and that works as well. So think of that. You can potentially go up to 10 years and get money back. And I've seen people get tens of thousands, or over 10,000, or at least many hundreds or thousands, depending on the circumstances and how far back they've missed stuff. So I'd like to thank you for being here today and for watching this seminar online as well. I hope this information can help you out in generating a few more dollars coming back to you each year, because again, it's so important. And remember, always file your return every year. That's critical. But also stay up to date. If you don't do your own tax returns, stay up to date with what's changed from year to year. That's how you stay aware of what's available. And that way, no matter who does your tax return, you're giving them a proper set of documentation and you're getting the most money back that you possibly can. So thank you and have a good day.